Alright, next up in black. Battlefly Swarm, Bone Splinters. Bone Splinters existing is relevant, but that's a card I've never found exciting, so whatever. Cult Conscript, you have text. What do you do? Cult Conscript, single black, 2/1 creature skeleton warrior. I love skeleton warriors. Something about that old theme song that always gets stuck in my head. Cult Conscript enters the battlefield tapped. 1 in the black, return Cult Conscript from your graveyard to your battlefield. Activate only if a non-skeleton creature died under your control this turn. We still have the Bone Splinters that exiles too. Do we? I don't know. Eaten alive. Oh, yeah. That sounds correct. So, no reason to play this. Retrieve Socks. Oh, dear. Oh, hey, you're still here, Socks. You want to come over? I guess you didn't technically leave, so I'm not, interrupting you too much. I get up and realize I'm coated in sweat. And then I pick Socks up and realize Socks is coated in sweat. Oh, I sure do love how warm it is. It's my favorite. Yeah, you probably don't want to be on my lap, do you? No. Alright, I think I'm going to let him out. I kind of had a feeling that's what was going to happen when I went to go pick him up. It is really not a comfortable temperature in here with my computer running. Okay, so what do we think about this? It is a Savannah Lions, and the latest in a long string of black getting Savannah Lions that come back from the graveyard when some condition is filled. I assume this card is going to be less playable based on the strengths and weaknesses of its own merits, and more playable contextually based on whether black wants a 1-mana 2/1 more than anything else. Which is to say, is there a black aggressive deck? Who knows? I suppose we find out. I certainly lack the capacity to predict that. I am not much of a Savannah Lions player. Next up, Cutdown. Single black instant. Destroy target creature with total power and toughness 5 or less. Huh. Okay. Power and toughness. So a 3/3 does not die to this. I think in the context of Pioneer and Historic, this is probably better than Fatal Push. Worse than Strangle? Oh no, I very much prefer this to Strangle. But that's mostly because I hate Strangle being a sorcery speed card. It just does not do enough of what I want. So ultimately this hits some 3-drops and mostly all 1 and 2 drops. This doesn't hit Planeswalkers? Yeah, but Strangle doesn't really actually hit Planeswalkers for real either. So it's almost no 3-drops. It hits the 2/3 flying 3-drop that draws cards whenever they make a 1/1. Doesn't ever hit Greasefang, but to me, Countdown is comparable to Fatal Push or I can't remember the name of Portable Hole. This hits basically everything that creature-wise that Cast Down hits, or that Fatal Push hits, and slightly more. Yeah, it's worse than Revolt Fatal Push, but you basically just don't trigger Revolt outside of Modern. Greasefang definitely doesn't matter in Standard. I am interested in Cutdown as a card in Pioneer. I think this is probably just an upgrade over Fatal Push in the Sultai Gargaroth deck we tried previously. Red-Black Sacrifice, yeah, is a deck that has Revolt and wants Fatal Push. That's totally reasonable. And Red-Black Midrange also plays Infinity sacrifice artifacts and Fatal Push having Revolt is an improvement. If you wanted to play like Esper Drago Control, then Cutdown starts to be pretty interesting to me. Like, Cutdown is the kind of card that makes 4 mana Teferi start to be sort of actually interesting, because now you're representing Cutdown off of the 1 mana that you untap with the Teferi. So you can play 4-drop Teferi and actually untap with reasonable interaction. Will this be up on YouTube? Yeah, that's the plan. Assuming I don't, like, get way too lazy and decide not to edit it. This does miss the 3/3 werewolf. Is the 3/3 werewolf legal? I thought that was... Yeah, Werewolf Pack Leader is not legal anymore. Which is weird, because you would think that that's from Midnight Hunt, but it was actually from Forgotten Realms. So I can't think of any 2-drop that this misses. Oh, in the context of Pioneer, yeah, it misses Pack Leader, but not a lot of decks play Pack Leader. So I'm not, like, super concerned about that. I do really like that this kills Rafine. That's very interesting. It misses Bankbuster, but I have never in my life cared about a Bankbuster attacking me, and I don't intend to start at any point. It can be pretty bad against Esper if you draw it later, yeah. But most of the goal against Esper is to not fall behind in the first place. Killing Diviner. Yeah, in the context of Alchemy, that is very interesting that this kills Diviner. I don't know that that's necessarily better than Rave Enfeeblement, but it might start replacing some copies of Rave Enfeeblement. You're not necessarily playing 4 Rave Enfeeblement's main deck anymore. Ray rotates. Oh, God. Oh, no. Alchemy's rotating Ray, which is like the only card that allowed non-Esper decks to exist. Oh, that's so bad. Yeah, Sultai Shigeki is a card that is a deck that I think really, really, really wants this. You're so hyper incentivized to play super tempo efficient cards in that deck, and this is a card that's super tempo efficient. Feel like the fact that this does nothing against Kamano into 2-drop is brutal? Not necessarily, because this doesn't do nothing against Kamano into 2-drop, because this still means you have Cutdown in your hand to answer the Kamano on turn 3. Like, yeah, you're not getting the optimal tempo of killing their 2-drop. It is a card that I would still absolutely want 4 copies of against any deck that's playing Kumano. Worse than Fatal Push in that scenario, yes, but also, like, in the context of Standard, we can't play Fatal Push. But it is worse than Push against Mono Red in Pioneer. Well, no. Well, hold on. I don't know what Pioneer Mono Red looks like. But Alchemy Mono Red, this thing hits Ambergris, and Fatal Push would not. And that's actually like a really huge deal. Yeah, are most of Mono Red's 2-drops still in range? I kind of think that's true, because aside from Eidolon, they don't play a ton of 2/2s in Pioneer. Pioneer Mono Red is Burning Tree and Eidolon. Yeah, but if they go turn 2... Or if they're playing a Burning Tree off of the Kumano, then you can still just cut down whatever they play off of the Burning Tree. Kari Zev with the +1/+1 counter is out of range as well. This is true too. But I mean, presumably we're going to be playing other removal spells that can hit a 2-drop besides just Cutdown. Cutdown's just our way to recover tempo. So it's okay that Cutdown misses some things, ultimately. I dig it. I like having this option. I'm interested to see where it goes. Next up. Evolved Sleeper. Against human, it hits a lot of things. It probably won't hit Adeline very often, but it could hit Adeline. Do you think this pushes aggro out of Standard for the foreseeable future? No. Because bear in mind, you can make the same argument that Fatal Push pushes aggro out of the format and it didn't. Fatal Push existed at a time period where mono red was the best deck in the format. So, it's contextual to the rest of the shells. So, Evolved Sleeper. Single black for a 1/1 creature human. Activated ability for black. Evolved Sleeper becomes a human cleric with base power and toughness 2/2. 1 in a black, if Evolved Sleeper is a cleric, put a death touch counter on it and it becomes a Phyrexian human cleric with base power and toughness 3/3. 1 black black, if Evolved Sleeper is a Phyrexian, put a +1/+1 counter on it, then you draw a card and you lose 1 life. This seems not very good at all. I don't know that I'm into this. It's fun. Yeah, it is fun. The third ability is a mana sink that you can activate multiple times to draw a bunch of cards. Ascendant Spirit is comparable to this, except that I think Ascendant Spirit is a better rate as far as being an aggressive creature goes, in terms of the mana that you put into it, into how much that it threatens. The main problem I have with Evolved Sleeper is that, unlike Ascendant Spirit, it kind of wants to be more aggressive, but the stats don't really support it, and the first couple of times you activate it, it's pretty easy to kill. The best thing you can say is that getting black mana is a lot easier than getting snow mana. By a lot. Thinking about it, 1 mana 1/1, 2 mana 2/2, 4 mana 3/3 Death Toucher fills out a curve well. It does fill out a curve well, but all of those stat lines are bad. I don't think this card is good until you get to the point where you're activating it for 3 mana to draw a card, and that's only relevant at the point at which you are running out of things to do, which ultimately brings me to the point of this seems like a much, much worse version of Tenacious Underdog. Like, you could hypothetically play both, but if you have Tenacious Underdog in your deck, then Tenacious Underdog is beginning to become committed to being your mana sink for aggression and card draw. And Tenacious Underdog as just a 2-drop that then you go on to do other things instead of continuing to invest in your 2-drop is way better than Evolved Sleeper, which requires you to invest like 4 mana to get to the point where it's equivalent to Tenacious Underdog or close to it. So the best thing, I guess, that this card is going for it is if you're trying to play like Draw Go and then you're activating Evolved Sleeper on their end of turn when they don't do anything. So like filling a Spectral Sailor, but kind of roll, but that costs way more mana and doesn't have flash. Yeah, no. I'm not seeing really anything out of this card at all. I don't know what niche this really has. Other than, yeah, Draw Go, but do you really want to play Evolved Sleeper as your card in Draw Go? When you could just, like, play Karn's silvery card draw thing? The other context is the next best black creature for a 1-drop is Okiba Raid. I don't even know if that's true. I think that the best, or a better black 1-drop than this is the 2/1 we saw in this set that was better than it. I deeply appreciate that Silver Something actually turned into Scrutiny. That's delightful. What's better? The 2/1 Skeleton that can come back. I think just being if your goal is to be aggressive, a 2-mana 2/1, or a 1-mana 2/1 is better than this. Also, you can discard Cult Conscript to your, what's his name? 3-mana Esper Demon Sphinx, and then get it back. That's like card advantage. Fable. Oh, yeah, that's also fair. We can also discard things to Fable. These abilities are instant speed, but Cult Conscript coming back at instant speed is interesting because it means you can actually bring it back on your opponent's turn after they board wipe you. Which is hypothetically a potentially very powerful option. Maybe. Let's see. This is the much more playable looking version of the white card that tricked me into thinking it was playable earlier. 1 black for a 2/2 creature human knight with menace, and your opponents can't gain life. 1 black, Knight of Dusk's Shadow gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This is definitely not a main deckable card. outside of, like, perhaps the most dedicated of Night Synergies decks, but sideboard opponents can't gain life is a really interesting option as far as lines of text goes. I mean, it would have to be a pretty specific metagame for there to be enough life gain decks that you'd want to sideboard this, but interesting to have access to. Ooh, exciting. Pilfer. 1 black sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Notable, because people will attempt to play this card. This is not a playable card, but people will attempt to play it. And I mostly want to highlight that despite the cute art and the adorable flavor text, 2 mana targeted discard has not at any point in time ever been playable, and continues to not be playable now. Worst check for traps? That implies that at any point in time, check for traps was ever a playable card. Or was good? It doesn't. I'm, like, being too mean. But this might actually be better than check for traps, in a sense, because it doesn't hurt you, whereas check for traps does. I don't know. Both suck. Don't play either, ever. Thought Erasure would like a word? No, it wouldn't! That card was literally never playable! That card sucked! But people played it anyway! God, I hate that card! It was so bad! The last time I ever remember a 2-mana discard effect being playable was Transgress the Mind. And it wasn't even that Transgress the Mind was actually good. It was that there was a ramp deck at the time, and you needed to have exile-based discard removal, or some decks just died to, what was it, World Breaker? And that was, like, actively just bad, but you had no better options. Hymn to Turok's a good 2-mana discard spell. I agree with that. There's even a close to 2-mana discard spell in Alchemy, where your opponent discards a card and then gets to choose whether or not to discard a second card. Like, those are reasonable. Try mentioning main deck Revitalize. Why are you acting like I'm okay with sideboard Revitalize? What? That's even more insulting than the implication that somebody could main deck Revitalize for a good reason. Shadowrite Priest. 1 and a black for a 2/2 creature human cleric. Other clerics you control get +1/+1. 3 black, sacrifice another cleric. 3 black, tap, sacrifice another cleric, search your library for a black creature card, put it into the battlefield, then shuffle. I mean, it combos with itself. Has clerics ever been a deck? Yeah, actually, there used to be a long time ago, around the time of what? Was it Scourge? Or Invasions? That had white-black clerics tribal? But I think that was also, this is way outside my realm of expertise, around when Rebels was like the big deck. So this sacrifices another cleric, but then goes and gets any black creature. Meaning we could like totally put Toxrill into play. What other really big black creatures do we have that are like cool? Scryfall, Advanced. Formats, Legal In, Future Standard, Black, Typeline, Creature, Enter, Sort By, Mana Value, Jump to the End. Dreadfeast Demon technically exists. Shadow Immortality's not good, really. Now it's basically kind of just Toxrill, by the looks of it. Cemetery Desecrator isn't, like, heinous. But mostly it's Toxrill. Toxrill isn't that great and constructed? That's not entirely true. It's not great against decks that have lots of access to just unconditional removal, but it actually is a card that, like, is kind of worth playing as far as stabilizing against aggro goes. Any multicolored black cards? I guess I did look for monocolored black cards. Mana value. No, type creature. Here we go. Olivia Crimson Bride? Oh, Zeatora. Technically like Lord Xander, or whatever. That's not good. Zeatora is interesting. Xanathar rotated out. Xanathar rotated out, yeah. Lord Xander is like hypothetically the card I was thinking you could go get because it's like a 7-drop, but I think it's still mostly just worse than Toxrill against the majority of decks. Hey, sorry to bother you, but I haven't played an MTG in a long time. Want to check it out again, but I don't know what everyone is using to play it online at the moment. If you don't have any online client, then Magic the Gathering Arena is the best option. It is not cheap necessarily to play competitively, but as far as like playing a little bit and kind of just building decks, and if you're not looking to get into like tournament play necessarily right away, you can play Arena free to play and have a lot of entertainment out of it, especially if you enjoy drafting. It's very good for drafting. Highly recommend. Duskmangler isn't entirely embarrassing. The big thing I'm not certain about is I don't really know what niche Shadowrite Priest has that makes it better than just playing a regular Reanimator list. Other than I guess you can just do normal Clerics things and play like 1 or 2 big creatures to reanimate or to tutor with Shadowrite Priest. You don't have to be a dedicated deck. Maybe that's the niche. But otherwise, Toxrill's cool, and Zeatora is not terrible top end for an aggressive deck. I mean, I have a lot of experience with Zeatora being cool top end for an aggressive deck. But if you're dedicated Reanimator in any way, then you're definitely... Or if you're dedicated to cheating big things into play, then I think your better route to go is Reanimation and reanimating the green Titan of Industry. I think once you're at the point where you're playing Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I would just rather be doing Titan of Industry things than Shadowrite Priest things. Yeah, I don't know that I see a niche to make this great, but it is interesting. Definitely interesting. Next up, Stronghold Arena. 1 and a black for an enchantment with kicker green and or white. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life for each time it was kicked. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. If you do, you lose life equal to its mana value. Yeah, I mean, hypothetically, this works with Goldhound in the same way that Professional Facebreaker does. This seems mostly just kind of worse than Professional Facebreaker, but also strictly different. Facebreaker loses a lot of its niche with Magdagon, though. I don't know. It is easier to keep on the battlefield, but also you have to play Stronghold Arena and still have a board of creatures that's capable of attacking your opponent and connecting with them for it to mean anything. Otherwise, it really doesn't do anything at all. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really seeing this. The fact that it doesn't put any creatures into play is kind of medium. Hypothetically, there could be like a mono-black aggro deck where you play this against control, I guess, if you're playing enough 1 and 2 drops. Like, it doesn't seem like this card is heinous with Tenacious Underdog, really. It's just... it's fine? I don't know. Not terribly interested. The Raven Man, 1 and a black for a 2/1 legendary creature human wizard. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 blackbird creature token with flying, and this creature can't block. 3 and a black, tap. Each opponent discards a card, activate only as a sorcery. This curves into Liliana. Yeah, I would need to want to play Liliana for that to be appealing. But it does hypothetically curve into Liliana. True. Curves into Rafine. That's very interesting. That is very, very interesting comparatively. Kind of curves into Fable. Doesn't quite as much curve into Fable. One of the things that... This is not a great stat line for a 2-drop. 2-1 is easy to kill, doesn't attack well. This is interesting with Rafine in the sense that you can attack with it as a 3-2, I guess, which still kind of dies sort of easy. And, like, gets blocked, and then it doesn't make a bird because it dies. But the fact that the birds can't block means that this kind of has to be in an aggressive deck, or else, I guess, a deck that really wants the mana sink of making the opponent discard a card as a sorcery, which isn't irrelevant, but is pretty expensive. Turn 2 Blood Tithe Harvester, turn 3 Raven Man, then sack blood. Yeah, that exists, but then that implies you have no 3-drops, because I would rather play like every 3-drop in a Blood Tithe Harvester deck than Raven Man on turn 3. Yeah, you can start proccing it on both end steps, and your opponent can accidentally proc Raven Man too. That's true. Rafine continues to be the most interesting thing to me because this card sounds like it wants to be aggressive, because that's the only thing the birds do, is be aggressive. And the birds go wide in a way that triggers Rafine more strongly. Kaido does work, but, like, I don't ever want to discard a card to Kaido, because if I'm discarding cards to Kaido, then Kaido isn't a good card. Shredder. Yeah, it's difficult to play Shredder in the context of Standard in a way that's meaningful, though, just because, like, Shredder requires you to lower your curve to such a extent. I mean, there were versions of Esper that were all about playing flyers that played Shredder and Rafine, and that was decent. A Raven, like a Miser's Raven Man in that wouldn't be too upsetting, I guess. And the value of Raven Man goes up if you're playing against Esper a lot, which I actually feel more like Raven Man is a card that you would play to punish your opponent for being a discard-based deck than to proactively do your own game plan. I mean, like, you're probably playing Raven Man because you have a discard game plan yourself, but, like, the marginal utility of this card to me seems to stand out as being worth including more if you're including it because there is a prevalence of, like, Rafine Esper. I don't know that it's a sideboard card, though, because I don't actually think that it's impactful enough against that. To me, this is the kind of card that is playable as a main deck card, or it's not playable at all, because it's not hyper efficient enough in a specific matchup to be worth using up one of your limited sideboard slots, but it has the potential to be fine against everything and a really good hedge against one specific matchup in game one if you're including it in your main deck. Good in Lilianaires, I guess. People are, like, so into the idea of playing Liliana, and, like, no part of me thinks Liliana's a good card, so I really don't see it. Seems good against control, nice little mana sink. Yeah, tapping 4 mana to make a control opponent discard 1 card at sorcery speed, I don't think is really going to get you anywhere against control. Like, that's kind of just too slow. That ability feels to me like the kind of effect that's good in a mid-range mirror more than anything else. With and against Rafine is definitely the niche that this card seems to occupy, or at least is the niche that makes the most sense to me intuitively. I feel like that's what this has a home in and against, if it has a home. Let's see. What else? This has a lot of text, and then it's probably going to be a limited only card anyway. 2 and a black for a 2/3 creature Phyrexian Berserker with kicker red menace. When Balduvine Atrocity enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. That mostly doesn't sound like it has any particularly useful synergies. I don't think Greasefang wants to play Mardu for this as a way to reanimate Greasefang when it can just, in white-black, already be playing the 9 lives, or not 9 lives, came back. The 2-mana reanimate that also reanimates from the graveyard. It just plays so much better with all your self-mill effects already. It's not really Gravedigger, because the creature that you bring back does die. You just get to attack with it once, really. Not terribly interesting. Greasefang wants to be Mardu because the best card is Fable and the Mirrorbreaker? I don't know that I've seen a Mardu version of Greasefang. Fable of the Mirrorbreaker is like the only good red card you really get, and it's not even super what the deck is trying to do, because so much of the deck is dedicated to how to put Parhelion in the graveyard on turn 1 or turn 2. Like, the Abzan version gets the advantage of playing Isika's Chariot as a fallback game plan, and gets a lot of cards at 2 mana that are very efficient at self-mill. The Esper version gets more disruption and more looting effects to get the card out of their hand. Like, Ledger Shredder and counter spells, I think, do more for that deck than Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, probably. Oh, Cherry was... Yeah. I'm talking in the context of Explorer and Pioneer. I don't think that a Greasefang deck exists in Standard. But yes, Chariot will be gone from Standard. The red version gets Fable and Blood in a better fair game against Rest in Peace. I don't think having a better fair game against Rest in Peace matters too much, because, like, turning a terrible matchup against Rest in Peace into a only normally bad matchup against Rest in Peace, if Rest in Peace actually happens and resolves and doesn't get removed, isn't, like... I don't think that's worth a ton. I think it's better to just try to have your opponent not play Rest in Peace as your game plan than to try to dedicate making your primary game plan worse in every other matchup and in game 1. But also, I kind of think that there's a pretty good chance that just playing for Isika's Chariot is also just a better fair game plan than Fable against Rest in Peace. I don't actually think Fable is, like, good at being aggressive or playing a fair game plan at all. Fable is good at many things, but pressuring your opponent's life total isn't really what it's good at. Anyway, Braids Arisen Nightmare. 1 black for a 3/3 legendary creature Nightmare. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life, and you draw a card. So this brings to mind sacrificing artifact tokens to me, especially doing so to trigger Oni Cult Anvil, with the specific expectation that most of the time your opponent won't have an artifact, so that you just draw a card and nug them for 2, which is even better than sacrificing stuff to Oni Cult Anvil directly. Which, that's very scary to me, and a big part of why I'm kind of excited about that 3-mana white, get rid of all the artifact token nonsense and all of the Oni Cult Anvils. Please give me a board wipe that kills 3 Oni Cult Anvils. Please, absolutely, delightfully love that. Braids is kind of, yes, looking a little bit like a Halloween color palette Sarah Kerrigan. You don't sack lands with this? Yeah, I can't imagine that you'd want to sacrifice lands most of the time. I mean, hypothetically you could, but it would really need to be your last resort. Because the problem with sacking lands against a control deck is that the control deck can just go, oh, cool, I can sacrifice a land to gain 2 life and stop you from drawing a card? Yes, I will do that. I mean, control decks tend to at some point be flooding out more than they need to. And the more late game it gets, the more control no longer needs all of its lands. Wastelanding your control opponent at the end of the game isn't actually good, I don't think. Like, relative to having any potential to... Oh, no, it doesn't matter. Its opponent may sacrifice. So you can't sacrifice enchantments with this to blow up your opponent's enchantments. Yeah, Wasteland is better early and worse late. So the fact that this in the late game is a Wasteland is like... It doesn't matter very much. I think this is a mech card. Oh, I very much disagree. I think this card is actively very good. Not by sacrificing a land, but just specifically, I think this is a excellent card for Oni Cult Anvil. More so that I think that the biggest part of this card is that it is a decent stat line creature that also comes with a burn spell at the end of every turn. And that's just, I believe, good. The fact that it draws cards is juicy extra on top of it. But I would be very close to wanting to play this even if it didn't draw a card. Yeah, I expect this to be probably a 2 of, maybe a 3 of if there are enough blood tokens in Rakdos lists. It just... Yeah, you know, it's probably 3 of if there isn't too much better to play, because they do also have Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which reduces the legendary downside. Dies to Strangle? Sure. But it dies to Strangle after having already triggered once, and also, like... then your opponents are playing Strangle. So, cool. I kind of want my opponents to be playing Strangle against my Anvil deck. That sounds like it's pretty good for me on the whole of things if they're keeping that in. I do not think Strangle is a good card against red-black, particularly. Sorcery removal kind of sucks. More importantly, it dodges the 1 mana removal that doesn't hit 6 toughness or 6 total stats or more creatures. I think that's a much bigger deal than Strangle, because I think that that's a much more playable card than Strangle on average. Let's see. This has a bunch of text. Braids' Frightful Return, 2 and a black. That's some... That's some art right there. Oh dear. Read ahead. First chapter, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, each opponent discards a card. That doesn't sound good at all. Second chapter, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, that's fine. Third chapter, target opponent may sacrifice a non-land, non-token permanent. If they don't, they lose 2 life and you draw. Okay, that's sort of awful. Moving on. I didn't even read this card. Should I be looking at this card? Choking My Asthma, 1 black sorcery. If this spell was kicked, or kick or green. If this spell was kicked, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Sorcery, it's not garbage, but it's kind of not exciting. Moving on. Liliana of the Veil. 1 black for a 3 loyalty legendary planeswalker Liliana. +1. Wow, this isn't a +2. Huh. Each player discards a card. -2. Target player sacrifices a creature. -6. Separate all permanents target player controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents in the pile of their choice. Card parity on the uptick. Edict on the downtick. We're at a point where so many cards get value when they enter the battlefield that I'm not, like, particularly concerned about edicts generally getting value. The best you can say about this card, I guess, is that while not protecting itself at all, you get card parity for 3 turns, other than the card that you invested in 3 mana by playing Lily. And then it threatens to ultimate, and it threatening to ultimate is good-ish. The best part is this sells more packs for other cards to be cheaper. Yes, I agree. This card will go a long way towards making Standard more affordable. I think this card's, like, unplayably bad. It isn't good. I don't think any part of this card other than the ultimate is interesting. The idea that you would play this instead of, like, literally any other 3-drop is... Can you imagine you playing Liliana of the Veil after your opponent just cast Fable of the Mirrorbreaker? Like, how utterly embarrassed are you as the Liliana of the Veil player as the Zoomer just, like, sits there and dabs on you while you cry, upticking and choosing to discard your own card? I would rather be playing, like, Graveyard Trespasser than this. I mean, Liliana does downtick and kills a Trespasser without paying for reward. Maybe that's the best thing that can be said about it. But, like, it's... I don't see the way in which this card is ever useful. Yeah, Obnixilis is, like, also a 3-drop, but better in most scenarios, and also wasn't really playable at all. Because it kind of didn't do very much, and it did more than this. Wedding Announcement is another example of a card that is far stronger than Liliana and much less embarrassing to cast. This is true. I wonder if years from now we'll get as hyped about a Fable reprint. Yeah. That's a glimpse into an uncomfortable future. Obnixilis is absurd in the Pioneer/Explorer Rakdos sack deck. Yeah, it's fine. It's not bad. It's no Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. It's no Mayhem Devil, but it's definitely like the 9th or 10th best 3-drop in that deck. Obnixilis doesn't remove a creature? Yeah, but like 3 mana for an Edict is not what I ever want to actually do, though. Like, that doesn't sound desirable, is the problem. Maybe Reanimator? But if I want to discard cards to reanimate, I can play Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, though. Right? Or I can have my opponent play a Liliana of the Veil to downtick, or to uptick for me. The fact that they pulled this out of their back pocket and expect to be hyped about it has quite a chilling effect on my thoughts for Magic's future. I think that that's actually, like, indicates that they have their finger directly on the pulse. They are very aware this card is not good enough to make, like, a huge impact, but is precisely good enough to get people excited, which is exactly the kind of reprint that I think is correct. I will say, I was really disappointed. They were teasing that there was going to be a Liliana of the Veil reprint, or they were teasing that there was going to be a Liliana reprint. I was really hoping it was going to be Liliana the Last Hope, even though flavor-wise that didn't necessarily make a ton of sense. But Last Hope is a card that I actually think is, like, pretty good and would be standard playable. But unfortunately, we got this instead. Oh well. Reminds me of when everyone was hyped that Jace was coming back to Modern. Yeah, Mind Sculptor was a bad card for a long time before it got unbanned. And people were very excited when it got unbanned. Anyway, that's about enough ranting about how this card isn't exciting and makes me sad. Oh, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. We can talk about... Oh, no. Where'd it go? Oh, shoot. I'll just open a new tab. We can talk about the mirror in the back where Liliana is actively looking... The reflection of Liliana is looking at Liliana, and the reflection is wearing the chain veil, despite Lily having gotten rid of the chain veil. And also the angel headband is, like, pointed in a different direction, although I'm not sure that's, like, entirely intentional. Anyway, there's some interesting implications going on in this mirror in the background of the card. What is the chain veil? Oh, okay. Chain veil, Magic the Gathering. What were the name of these? Onake. The chain veil is an ancient and powerful artifact that was hidden within the ancient catacombs of the Onake at Chandalar. It's basically a artifact face mask that looks a lot like this, that gives planeswalkers some kind of power, and also, I believe, included the spirits of all of the Onake? Or something? Was created to turn someone into a vessel for the resurrection of the long-dead Onake. It kills its users if they're not strong enough. Others, like Obnixilis, are turned into a demon. Was Obnixilis turned into a demon by the Chain Veil? Or did Obnixilis just turn into a demon because he was super into being evil? And, like, got turned into a demon by demons. Is that a retcon? It's very confused. Demons and angels in Magic are... I'm not sure what's going on with them, because as far as I can tell, sometimes they're supposed to be mana constructs that don't have a soul. And at one point, couldn't be planeswalkers because they were mana constructs and not actual beings with a soul. But then other times that isn't true. And then sometimes people like Obnixilis, who are, I think, humans, just turn into demons and still are planeswalkers. But maybe that was an explanation for how the human planeswalker became a demon that isn't actually technically a demon. It's just a person with like a bunch of demonic energy in them. It's unclear. I don't know. But it is interesting to think about. Alright. Next up, Defiler of Flesh. 2 black for a 4/4 creature Phyrexian Horror with Menace. As an additional cost to cast black permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. These spells cost black less to cast if you paid life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of black mana you pay. Whenever you cast a black permanent spell, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains mana until end of turn. That doesn't sound particularly good. I guess if you're playing this alongside black 1-drops, it's kind of cool that this is a 4/4 menace for 4 that gives +1/+1 and menace to another creature when DTBs. And also threatens to do that on future turns, and also lets you play a 1-drop for free after playing it. As far as good black-costed creatures go, we basically have the 1-drop 2/1 from this set. We have Tenacious Underdog as far as a 2-drop goes that combos pretty well with this. Hypothetically, you could play this with Bloodtithe Harvester to turn Defiler of Flesh into a decent 5-drop. There's Evolved Sleeper that's not... I don't think that card's particularly good, but it exists. I don't think this is great. I don't think this is what I want to play as my top end in an aggressively slanted black deck, but it isn't, like, embarrassing either. I just think it's probably ultimately not worth building around. Not quite enough payoff and stats for 4 mana, I don't think. Better to play Braids and sacrifice the 4th land. I don't know that sacrificing lands with Braids is ever something that you want to do, because the fact that your opponent has the choice about whether to sacrifice the land or let you draw a card kind of makes that feel pretty eh. Drag to the Bottom. 2 black sorcery with Domain. Each creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is 1 plus the number of basic land types among lands you control. So in a 3-color deck where you've played a Triome, this is Languish, I guess. I mean, I guess. Board wipes fluctuate pretty often in terms of how playable they are. I guess I don't really know whether or not board wipes are going to look good. I assume if you're playing a tricolor mid-range or control deck, then having access to Languish is something desirable. I'm nervous about the fact that if you don't draw a Triome, this is probably a pretty underwhelming card. Might be a 5-color Esper deck that plays off-color Triomes, I guess, but do I want to play a 5-color deck that's playing a bunch of tap lands just to get a board wipe that also kind of, from a deck-building standpoint, requires me to not really play much in the way of creatures? Or else I don't really get to break the parity of the board wipe? Yeah, and as far as playing like a control deck goes, all of the best 2-color fixing that isn't exactly the triomes doesn't really synergize with this because they don't have land types. Slow lands did not rotate. They are from the 2 Innistrad sets. So we should still have those, and we should still have triomes, and we should have whatever new lands are in this set. So, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of how unreliable this is, and I'm also not entirely even sure like whether or not Languish would be in a good spot. Languish would probably be in a good spot against mono white since it hits Adeline, in all likelihood. So if mono white with Adeline is a significant part of the meta, then maybe triomes plus drag to the bottom gets us somewhere. But also it kind of feels weird that like you probably need to be playing like 6 triomes for drag to the bottom. This versus Meathook. I mean, Meathook is, I guess maybe both. This card does something against mono white that Meathook does not, which is kill Adeline before you're dead. Meathook, like, X equals 2 is pretty good because you gain a bunch of life, but you're still sort of operating under the assumption that you're not actually going to kill their Adeline with a Meathook in any time frame that's relevant. Whereas drag to the bottom on 4 actually clears the board. So, yeah, I would definitely see myself as playing both before playing one or the other necessarily. I mean, I might play like 3 drag to the bottoms before the first Meathook. Sometimes you need Languish. Yeah. I would probably be convinced and come away from this set review saying that Languish was probably a good card and would have a role to fill depending on the metagame. But I guess I'm ultimately just skeptical and think drag to the bottom might just not be Languish because you need it to be Languish on turn 4, and turn 4 is when it is not guaranteed to be Languish. And that, like, if that makes it ultimately worse than Languish, then I'm not sure if worse than Languish is playable. Would I play this over the SNC Wrath? Was there a Streets of New Capenna Wrath? Oh, is that the mono white blow everything up if they had a like multicolored card they get to draw a card? Depopulate? I don't know if I would play it over the SNC Wrath. Yeah, I don't know. X+1 is decent, but in my mind, I want this to do -4/-4 before it's playable. And if the only way it can get to -4/-4 is if you drew a triome, then I feel like you need to play a lot of triomes in your deck to make that reliable, and then you're playing a lot of tap lands, and I don't know. That feels like the deck building costs for this card are steeper than I'd be comfortable with. Don't think it needs to be -4/-4 on turn 4. I feel like if it's not -4/-4 on turn 4, I don't think it's good enough to play. I think anything less than that is too slow and not enough impact. But I'm basing that pretty hard on my belief that I need it to kill Adeline, and that if it doesn't kill Adeline, it's not doing its role as a 4-drop. Board wipes are in general not good enough to play? Yeah. Triomes help a lot, but you don't get to play too many triomes. Like, it kind of is triome or bust to build a good mana base, because in order to build a good mana base, especially a mana base that's 3 colors, you have to play a bunch of lands that don't have land types. Rafine is another creature we want to hit, that's true, and drag to the bottom is basically never going to kill Rafine. Does it bump to Righteous Valkyrie? Righteous Valkyrie's rotating, so I'm not too worried about that. I don't think drag to the bottom is playable in any format older than Standard. Every other format has much better cards than drag to the bottom. Would I throw it into a deck that's already way too many colors? I don't know. That depends on what that deck looks like. Thran's Portal. Haven't looked at that one yet. I assume it's a card from later on. We can take a peek ahead if it's contextual to this kind of an archetype. Thran Portal. Land Gate. Thran Portal enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. As it enters the battlefield, choose a basic land type. Does the chosen type in addition to its other type. Mana abilities of Thran Portal will cost an additional life to activate. So if it's your third land, it enters untapped. You choose a type. I don't think this actually affects that at all. Thran Portal to me reads like the kind of card that would make it easier to hit your second land type and your fourth land type in the average game. Because you're probably maybe going to be capable of finding a basic or another Thran Portal, which makes a Thran Portal into your second land type. Or you found a Triome, in which case Thran Portal is your fourth land. But for the purposes of that board wipe, the make or break point is your third land. So I don't really see Thran Portal making a difference. And at that point, the fact that this is just like probably a really nasty pain land version of a slow land, like I can't imagine ever wanting this in a 3-color deck. And I don't even think that if I was playing a 3-color deck playing the new Languish, I think this is worse than just playing an off-color Triome. Yeah, if we had shocks, that'd be a different story, but like, unless we're dramatically increasing the number of basics that we're playing in the average deck, I don't see it. I'm assuming that Thran Portal picking 2 land types would probably be pretty busted for the purposes of domain consistency. But neat design. And there will certainly be niches for this. A deck that cares about the second land type or the fourth and the fifth land type probably has way more use for Thran Portal. This specific hypothetical is not a deck that is like concerned with whether or not it makes it to the fourth or fifth land type. Thran Portal is more aggro-focused? I don't think that's true. Thran Portal is a untapped third, fourth, fifth land, right? So it's a tap land for your first 2 turns, which isn't good for aggro. It's untapped. Oh, am I reading this wrong? 2 or fewer? Got it. Okay. Unless, okay, I was reading as if you control 2 or fewer other lands. That was where I was reading it wrong. Okay, yeah, so it's better for aggressive decks. I like that more. Yeah, that's a better design, I think. That has more of a niche that fills the Painland kind of deck, and also makes it better for... I'm assuming Domain is generally a more aggressive deck than a controlling deck, but I guess maybe that's because my mental association is with landfall, and that's probably not like actually a reasonable association to be making. But the only experience I have with Domain is in cards that are probably more aggressive. Domain is more aggressive here? Yeah, okay. I mean, there is... So, I guess 2 of the Domain cards we've looked at, the ones that I've spent the most time discussing, are the ones that are inherently not aggressive, which is the Flash O-Ring thing that reduces its mana cost, and the board wipe. But I don't want to play... I don't see the Flash O-Ring thing ever being terribly... It does not feel like that is on rate to be a good removal spell in formats without access to fetch lands. Aggro does have to sometimes hit the 4th land untapped, but not, like, terribly often. But, yeah, again, that's contextual to what a particular aggro deck looks like, or doesn't look like. Currently, like, the Boros aggressive decks, but they wouldn't have any reason to play Thran Portal, but they have, like, 1 4-drop card. Unclear. Monstrous War Leech. You have a bunch of text. Are you just a limited card? 3 black for Monstrous War Leech. Star Creature Leech Horror. Kicker blue. As Monstrous War Leech enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, mill 4 cards. Monstrous War Leech's power and toughness are each equal to the highest mana value among cards in your graveyard. Okay, never mind. I got tricked. There was a bunch of text, and it was a limited card that wasn't good. Shieldred's Restoration, 3 and a black sorcery, kicker 2 and a white. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was kicked, you gain life equal to that card's mana value. Otherwise, you lose that much. Oh, life. Exile Shieldred's Restoration. Huh. I mean, 4 mana reanimate's interesting. Of the reanimation spells that we have a lot of 5 mana reanimation spells that play a lot better with Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. I guess the best thing you can say about this is that if they kill your Fable of the Mirrorbreaker token, you can still reanimate on turn 4, as opposed to a lot of the other options that are 5. Velomachus is rotating, yes. As far as reanimation spells go, or as far as reanimation targets go, by far and away the best target is Titan of Industry. And I think that is just like the de facto first 4 cards you play in a reanimation list. Then you can look at like Toxrill or Jin-Gitaxias or the white 6-drop Angel. I think after Titan, the white 6-drop Angel is probably the card I'm most interested in reanimating. Mostly because Fable of the Mirrorbreaker feels mandatory in any reanimator list, and it, along with Titan, are the cards that pair best with Fable. Sanctuary Ward. Yeah, that's the one. But that said, I mean, you're inherently very often in a position where, as a reanimation deck, you want to stabilize against aggro. And I don't know that the 1 mana cost reduction on this is worth losing 7 life against aggro. That seems like a really big cost. I gotta feel like... I don't remember what the reanimation spell is, but there's like some 5 mana green-black reanimation spell that like has conditions that make it cheaper to cast. Or like another one that you can sometimes cast at instant speed. And that, I think, is just, like, probably still better than this. I don't think this could have been 3 mana. I think 3 mana would be way too good. Yeah, Diregraph Rebirth. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature that died this turn. Oh, and it has flashback. Yeah, the flashback part is a huge deal on that card being excellent. Yeah, with Titan you'd only lose 2 life, but then you're not gaining 5 life that you would get if you had used Diregraph Rebirth. I don't think 3 mana would be fine at all, because like that would imply that on turn 3 you could reanimate a Titan, and that sounds way too good. Hypothetically, you can cast this with a kicker, especially with Fable of the Mirrorbreaker in your deck. Like, it wouldn't be unreasonable to get to 7 mana if they just didn't kill the Fable of the Mirrorbreaker token and you got 2 treasures off it. If they reanimate a Titan, we get it with a Liliana. But you don't, though, because Titan comes with a friend that can get sacrificed to Lily. It's still not good. Yeah. So, interesting, but ultimately I don't think this gets anywhere. Shieldred the Apocalypse. 2 black for a 4/5 legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. Death Touch. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. This is probably fine, I think. It sort of has an ETB if your opponent's tapped out. Yeah, it's good with Fable, although it's not a... It is a legendary, so you can't copy it with Fable, which is always disappointing. Sideboard card against Phoenix? Nah, I don't think you want to sideboard a thing that dies to Lava Axe against Phoenix. I mean, 4/5 Death Touch for 4 isn't awful stats. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this doesn't look too hard to kill. Yeah, it's good with and against Rafine, I suppose. Is it the best thing you can be doing with or against Rafine? Maybe? Yeah, having like even just Ward 1 would make me feel a little better about this. What does our instant speed removal look like in Future Standard? What kind of removal is likely to see play? Because I'm pretty sure Vanishing Verse is gone, so that helps a little bit. We have March of Otherworldly Light isn't great against Shieldred. Same story, March of Wretched Sorrow is actively worse. What does our black 2-mana removal look like? We have Destroy Evil. Destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater. That's probably not likely to be played. Fateful Absence killing Shieldred makes me definitely a little bit sad if I'm the Shieldred player, because my brain does think that there's a chance Fateful Absence has gone up to being a 4 of if the new 3-mana board wipe thingy is as playable as I suspect it might be. Infernal Grasp kills Shieldred, but I guess if you're playing Shieldred, you're playing it in an aggressive list, and your opponent playing Infernal Grasp as their removal is not like the worst thing to happen to you. Parasitic Grasp doesn't hit it. Midnight Ambush isn't particularly playable. Valorous Stance hits it. Wow. Our 2-mana removal is actually pretty limited. It was no longer have, like, Cast Down or... Well, Cast Down wouldn't hit this. No Power Word kill, huh? So we are not necessarily looking at a format where we have easy access to Doomblade unless you're in white. Fateful Absence, looking like the premier removal spell post-rotation. Interesting. Interesting. Alright, well, we're definitely going to be spending a lot of time brewing up Fateful Absence decks going forward, it looks like. That said, I do still feel like Shieldred's probably like... Not like... I don't think this really does enough for a 4-drop. But it's not as easy to kill as I perhaps originally thought that it might be. It's just... mostly doesn't do a ton. I think this kind of fits a very similar role to the Raven Man for me, actually. Where it seems more like a card that is playable and potentially main deckable because of the matchups that it hates, rather than its own inherent strengths. The Cruelty of Gix. 3 black for a saga with Rita Head. First chapter, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a creature or planeswalker card from it. That player discards that card. Second chapter, search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle, you lose 3 life. Not a May. Third chapter, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. A graveyard, yeah, meaning yours or the opponent's. It's a May that you can just skip to chapter 3. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's potentially interesting as far as reanimation goes that compared to that flashback spell we were talking about earlier, this is just a 5-mana reanimation card you can play that hits either graveyard. Because you can just skip to chapter 3. But if you don't want to do that, then you can Thoughtseize... Well, no. You can... Oh, gosh. What was the name of the effect that hits creature or planeswalker? It's not Duress. It's... It was in, like, Khans of Tarkir or something, wasn't it? No. Dragons of Tarkir? Is it Divest? Is Divest... I thought Divest was an artifact. Artifact or creature. Scryfall, help me out here. Creature, planeswalker, discard, black, sorcery. No, not Orin's Epiphany. Really? No? Is there not one? Despise. Despise is the card I was thinking of. Wait, why did Despise not turn up in this? Anyway, what set was Despise from? Was it Dragons of Tarkir? It was Khans of Tarkir. Okay. I knew I was slightly right about that. Despise looks like a strong card. I I think it was like actually just completely unplayable. It was typoed? Was it? I wasn't actually searching on Oracle creature, planeswalker, discard. Oh, I typoed planeswalker. I typed planewalker with no S. All right, that's how I'm gaslighting myself here. Your opponent gets a lot of opportunities for counterplay. I mean, yeah, if you go for the first chapter on this, my interest in this card is I am interested in this as a 5-mana reanimate for a Fable of the Mirrorbreaker deck where most of the time the intention is to just skip to chapter 3. And then the times where you don't skip to chapter 3 and instead do the first chapter or the second chapter are kind of just like bonus card advantage flexibility on top of that. And that's... I think if you view this as a saga where the default is to go to chapter 3, I think this becomes more interesting, but it has to be with a deck that you want to be doing reanimation things with. Whether that's worth the opportunity cost of not playing the reanimation that has card advantage by virtue of having flashback, I don't know. The other one does have to be green-black, whereas this doesn't need to be green-black. That's true, but I don't think green-black is a downside when you probably, if you're playing a reanimation deck right now, want to be a reanimating Titan anyway, and that kind of behooves you to have the mana to hardcast Titan eventually. Yeah, the flexibility of going tutor into reanimate on later turns is also kind of interesting. Unfortunately, it does require you to target a creature, so you can't in any way set this up with Fable of the Mirrorbreaker as a discard on the same turn. I guess that'd be hard to do. You have to play them in... Like, if you had 8 mana, you could play Cruelty of Gix, tutoring up Fable, play Fable. Next turn, discard with Fable and reanimate. But that just, like, doesn't actually do anything. Also, that would imply that you had a card that you want to discard in hand to reanimate, and so that you could just, like, play that card instead of Cruelty of Gix. I don't know. I think that there's some interesting nuance here, and I don't think this card is useless, but it's definitely going to take some tweaking to figure out if it's even the right card for its own shell. Yeah, the sagas both activate in your main phase. So you hypothetically could draw the card you wanted to reanimate with Fable, but in that case, why are you tutoring Fable with Gix? You probably should just tutor what you were going to reanimate. They do not activate at the end of the draw step. I believe they activate at the beginning of the main phase, but functionally those are, I guess, basically the same thing, more or less. This makes Archon of Falling Stars invincible. It is a combo-ish, I suppose. They have errated them to happen at the beginning of the end of the draw step. What does that mean? Add one after your draw step. That just... Right, so that just means at the beginning of the main phase. Matters for sagas which make mana? Wait, how does that matter in any... How is that different than the beginning of the main phase? Is that not the same thing? There's got to be some edge case where after your draw step means something that isn't the beginning of the main phase. I am guessing that it is intended to be more clear about what the beginning of the main phase is, because players were unintentionally assuming they could do things with priority in the main phase before the sagas were triggering, and so the wording is intended to be more explicit to players who were misconstruing it, but functionally from a rules standpoint, Those feel like they mean the exact same thing. Not a functional change. And then, finally, Writhing Necromass. 6 black for a 5/5 creature zombie giant. Death touch. Yeah, I guess. It exists.